I never thought the woman I was about to marry would ask me to hand over part of my company to her parents as a wedding gift, but here we are. My name is Aaron. I'm 33, and I own a tech consulting business that I built from absolutely nothing. No inheritance, no trust fund, no wealthy relatives bailing me out when things got tough. Just me grinding 16-hour days in a cramped apartment for the first 3 years, living off ramen and refusing to quit when every rational person told me to get a real job. The company finally took off about 2 years ago. We landed a major contract with a healthcare network, then another with a logistics firm, and suddenly I had 12 employees, actual office space, and enough profit that I could finally breathe without checking my bank account every morning. I met Jenna about 18 months ago at a networking event. One of those sterile hotel ballroom situations where everyone pretends to care about each other's elevator pitches. But she was different, confident in a way that didn't feel forced, laughing at the absurdity of the whole scene. And when she walked up to me and said, "You look like you'd rather be literally anywhere else," I knew I liked her immediately. We started dating. Things moved fast. She was ambitious, driven, working in marketing for a mid-sized firm, and she seemed to understand the entrepreneur lifestyle in a way most people didn't, or at least I thought she did. 6 months in, I proposed at this little restaurant we'd gone to on our first real date. She said yes, and suddenly we were planning a wedding for the following spring, about 15 months away, which felt reasonable for getting everything organized. The wedding planning started simple enough, but Jenna gradually took control of every detail: the venue, the flowers, the catering, the guest list, and honestly I didn't mind because I was slammed at work and she seemed to enjoy it. Plus we weren't living together yet, so it made sense for her to handle the logistics from her apartment while I focused on a major project rollout. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Carter, were pleasant enough on the surface, her mom always smiling and asking about the business, her dad mostly quiet but supportive. They lived about an hour away in a nice suburban house, not wealthy but comfortable, and they seemed genuinely happy that their daughter was marrying someone financially stable. About 3 months before the wedding, I started noticing small comments from Jenna, little remarks about how her parents had sacrificed so much for her education, how they deserved to enjoy their retirement, how family should take care of family. Nothing alarming on its own, just enough to make me think she was hinting that maybe I should help them out financially at some point, which I wasn't opposed to if it was reasonable and discussed properly. Then came the kitchen conversation that changed everything. We were at my place, making dinner together on a Thursday evening. She was chopping vegetables, and I was dealing with the chicken, and she brought it up so casually that I almost didn't catch the weight of what she was saying. "I've been thinking about a really meaningful gift we could give my parents," she said, not even looking up from the cutting board. I assumed she meant like a vacation or maybe helping with a home renovation, so I said sure. What did she have in mind? And that's when she dropped it. "What if we gifted them shares in your company? It would be such a beautiful gesture, showing them they're part of our future." I actually laughed because I thought she was joking, like this was some bit she was doing, but when I looked at her face I realized she was dead serious. The smile was still there, but her eyes were watching me carefully, waiting for my reaction, and I felt this cold drop in my stomach. I put down the knife I was holding and asked if she understood what she was actually suggesting, and she nodded like this was the most natural thing in the world, talking about how it's symbolic, how it shows respect, how it brings them into the family business. The word symbolic stuck with me because there's nothing symbolic about signing over actual equity in a company. That's real ownership, real voting rights, real financial stake, but she was framing it like giving someone a decorative plate. I tried to explain the reality of what she was asking for. How in an S-corp you can't just gift shares to people without serious legal implications and tax consequences. How her parents would literally own part of my business with rights to profits and potentially a say in major decisions depending on how the shares were structured. But she kept minimizing every point I made with that dismissive wave of her hand. She always did when she didn't like what she was hearing. She insisted I was overcomplicating it, that other people do this all the time, that it's just paperwork my lawyer could figure out. And when I explained that no, other people actually don't do this, that equity in a private company isn't some token you hand out at family gatherings, she switched tactics. She started talking about how they wouldn't interfere, how they wouldn't even know what to do with it, how it's just about the gesture, and that's when I realized she fundamentally didn't understand or didn't care to understand what she was actually asking for. The conversation went in circles for about 20 minutes, her insisting it was simple and meaningful, me trying to explain why this was an insane request, and the more I pushed back, the more I could see her getting frustrated, not sad or understanding. just annoyed that I wasn't immediately agreeing. Eventually, she dropped it with a tight-lipped response about how I should just think about it, and we finished making dinner in uncomfortable silence. That night, I barely slept, lying there staring at the ceiling and replaying the conversation in my head, trying to figure out where this had come from. We'd never discussed anything like this before. Her parents had never expressed any interest in my business beyond polite questions. So why now? Why 3 months before the wedding? Why framed as a gift instead of a straightforward conversation about financial planning? The more I thought about it, the more wrong it felt. Not just the request itself, but the way she'd presented it, casual and inevitable, like my agreement was just a formality. I'd worked 80-hour weeks to build this company. I'd risked everything I had. I'd signed personal guarantees on loans that would have destroyed me if things went south. And now she wanted me to just hand over a piece of that to people who had contributed nothing, not capital, not labor, not expertise, just because they were her parents. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened, cheerful and affectionate, making coffee and talking about wedding RSVPs, and I almost convinced myself I'd overreacted, that maybe this was just a weird idea she'd drop once she thought about it more clearly. But something in my gut told me this conversation wasn't over, and I was right. She came back to it 3 days later while we were driving to finalize details with our wedding venue. Casual as anything, like she was asking me to pick up milk on the way home, asking if I'd thought more about the shares situation. I told her I had, and my answer was still no, that it wasn't happening, and I watched her jaw tighten for just a second before she forced a smile and said okay in this tone that clearly meant it wasn't okay. Over the next 2 weeks, she brought it up 6 more times, each approach slightly different, testing new pressure points like she was running experiments to see what would crack me. First, it was about connections, how her dad knew a city council member who could help if I ever needed permits or zoning changes, how her mom was in a book club with the CFO of a regional hospital chain that could become a massive client, framing the shares as a networking investment rather than a gift. When I pointed out that I'd built my client base without needing her parents' connections and didn't plan to start mixing family with business development, she switched tactics immediately. Then it became about our future, about how when we had kids we'd need her parents' help, how they'd want to be involved and supportive but would need to feel valued and included first. Like giving them equity now was some kind of down payment on future babysitting. The logic was so twisted I didn't even know where to start unpacking it. But what bothered me most was how calculated it all felt, like she'd sat down and mapped out every possible argument, every emotional lever she could pull. The real turning point came on a Saturday afternoon when I was at the office catching up on some project proposals. My phone rang, her mom's name on the screen, and that was unusual because Mrs. Carter and I had a perfectly pleasant but surface-level relationship, maybe a dozen conversations total. I answered expecting maybe some question about the wedding, but instead she opened with how she wanted to thank me personally for my incredibly generous idea. My stomach dropped because I had no idea what she was talking about, so I asked her to clarify. And she laughed this warm, grateful laugh that made everything worse, explaining how Jenna had told them I wanted to bring them into the business as a wedding gift, how touched they were, how much it meant to know I saw them as real partners in our future. I sat there in my office chair trying to process what I was hearing. Jenna had told them this was happening, had presented it as my idea, had gotten them excited and grateful for something I'd explicitly said no to, and now her mom was thanking me like it was a done deal. I managed to say something non-committal about still discussing details, but Mrs. Carter kept going, talking about how proud they were, how they'd always known Jenna would marry someone who understood the importance of family, and every word felt like another layer of trap closing around me. When I finally got off the phone, I just sat there staring at my computer screen, not seeing anything, trying to understand what game was being played here. She'd gone behind my back. She'd made promises using my company as currency. She'd created expectations